Hello. Imagine leaving your cozy room with a cool drink and being transported to Dry Gulch, a town in the middle of the prairie where 1873 smells like dust, sweat, and whiskey that seems to have been brewed from a burnt-out dream. Today, I'm going to tell you what a typical day of a sheriff in the Wild West looks like. Not the heroic day with gunfights that is depicted in fiction, but a real routine where the law is kept on strong nerves, a few good words and, if you're lucky, a little coffee. Our hero, Jonathan Kell, is just getting used to the role of sheriff, and his day is a mixture of sweltering heat, petty quarrels, and a premonition that trouble is lurking around the corner. Are you ready? Then grab your imaginary badge and let's go. Alright, my friend, settle in. Picture a world where the sun doesn't just shine, it punches you in the face. It's the summer of 1873, and we're in Dry Gulch, a town so parched it makes a desert look like a spa resort. The air's thick with dust, gritty enough to chew, and the horizon's just a hazy shimmer of heat and despair. Somewhere out there, a tumbleweed rolls by, lazy as a cat in a sunbeam, probably because even it knows there's nowhere worth going in this godforsaken place. And into this dusty, sun-scorched corner of the Wild West rides Jonathan Kell, our hero, our sheriff, and a man who's starting to think his big life plan might have been scribbled on a napkin during a bad poker game. Jonathan's not your typical gunslinger, the kind with a squint sharp enough to cut glass and a grudge heavier than a stagecoach. He's young, barely 30, with a face that still carries a hint of city polish beneath a layer of trail dust and stubble. Back in St. Louis, he was a clerk, pushing papers and dreaming of adventure, fueled by too many dime novels about noble sheriffs taming lawless towns. Those stories made it sound so easy. Ride in, pin on a badge, shoot a few outlaws, and bask in the gratitude of a cheering crowd. Now, as his boots crunch on the cracked earth of Dry Gulch's Main Street, he's wondering if those authors ever actually visited the West. His Colt Peacemaker, a shiny new model straight from 1873's finest armory, hangs heavy on his hip, like it's reminding him of the weight of his choices. His wide-brimmed hat, once crisp and proud, is already dusted over, blending in with the beige monotony of the prairie. Jonathan's pragmatic, though. He knows this job's gonna be tougher than a saloon steak left on the grill too long. But he's got a stubborn streak wider than the Mississippi, and he's not about to turn tail just because the welcome's colder than a banker's heart. Dry Gulch itself? Well, let's just say it's not winning any beauty contests. The town's a ramshackle collection of weathered wood and broken dreams, squatting in the middle of nowhere like it lost a bet with God. The main street, really, the only street, is a dusty strip lined with buildings that look like they're one strong gust away from collapsing into kindling. There's the general store, its sign creaking like it's groaning about the heat, a livery stable that smells like it's housing more flies than horses, and the rusty Spur Saloon, which looks like it was built by a drunk architect during a sandstorm. The jail, Jonathan's new office, is a sad little structure with bars so rusty they might crumble if you sneeze too hard. The townsfolk have been living under the shadow of Silas Coyote Reed and his band of outlaws for years. Silas is the kind of man who'd steal your horse, your boots, and your last shred of dignity, then sell you the story of how he did it for a nickel. The people of Dry Gulch are skeptical of anyone claiming they'll bring law to this chaos, especially a greenhorn like Jonathan. They've seen sheriffs come and go, usually in a pine box or on the next stagecoach out, muttering about better opportunities in places with less gunfire. As Jonathan rides in on his horse, a sturdy bay named Mabel who's got more sense than half the people he's met, the street's quiet, save for the creak of that general store sign and the distant clink of glasses from the saloon. Mabel snorts, tossing her head like she's already judging the place, and Jonathan can't blame her. The air smells of dry earth, horse sweat, and something faintly like whiskey and despair. Dust swirls around his boots as he dismounts, and he feels eyes on him from every window, like vultures sizing up a fresh carcass. "Well, Mabel," he mutters, patting her flank. "If this is paradise, I want a refund." Mabel flicks an ear, unimpressed, and Jonathan adjusts his badge, a shiny star that practically screams, "New guy," before squaring his shoulders and taking a good look at his new home. Let's pause here, my friend. Imagine you're standing there with him, squinting into the glare, the heat pressing against your skin like a hot iron. The air's so dry it feels like you're breathing sand, and every breath carries the faint tang of dust and leather. What would you do? Tip your hat and stroll in like you own the place, or maybe start calculating how fast you could get back to civilization? Jonathan, bless his stubborn heart, chooses the former. He ties Mabel to a hitching post outside the saloon, gives her a reassuring pat, and heads for the Rusty Spur. Because if you're gonna meet a town, you start where the gossip flows faster than the liquor, and in Dry Gulch, that's the saloon. The Rusty Spur's doors swing open with a groan that sounds like the building's complaining about the interruption. Inside, it's a haze of cigar smoke, stale beer, and sour dreams. The bar's lined with locals, grizzled cowboys with faces like old leather, a couple of prospectors who look like they've been chewing gravel since the gold rush, and a bartender who's polishing a glass like it's his life's mission to make it shine. The floorboards are warped, sticky with spilled whiskey and who knows what, and the air smells like a mix of sweat, tobacco, and regret. A piano player in the corner, a wiry fellow with a mustache that could double as a broom, hammers out a tune that's more enthusiasm than talent. Every head turns as Jonathan steps in, his boots thumping on the floor like a drumbeat announcing trouble. The piano player misses a note, and the room goes quieter than a church on Monday morning. "Afternoon," Jonathan says, tipping his hat. His voice is steady, but he's sweating under his leather vest, and not just from the heat. The weight of those stairs is heavier than his peacemaker, and he can feel the skepticism rolling off the crowd like heat off a stove. "I'm Jonathan Kell, your new sheriff." The silence stretches like a taut rope, long enough to make a man rethink his life choices. Then, from the back, a gravelly voice pipes up. "Sheriff, huh? Last one didn't make it past supper." A ripple of laughter spreads, sharp and mean, cutting through the haze. Jonathan spots the speaker, a lanky cowboy with a scar across his cheek, leaning against a poker table littered with cards and empty glasses. The man's got the kind of grin that says he's seen trouble and probably invited it over for a drink. His name's Zeke, though Jonathan won't learn that until later. Right now, he's just the guy trying to make the new sheriff squirm. Jonathan forces a smile, the kind you'd give a dog that's eyeing your lunch. "Well, I'm planning to stick around for dessert," he says, keeping his tone light. "Maybe even breakfast, if the coffee's decent." That gets a few chuckles, but they're cautious, like the crowd's not sure if he's brave or just plain foolish. He's banking on them wondering, because in a town like this, doubt can be as good as respect, at least for now. The bartender, a burly man named Gus with a beard that could hide a coyote, slides a glass of whiskey across the bar. "On the house," he grunts, his voice like gravel under a wagon wheel. "You'll need it." Jonathan takes the glass, gives it a sniff, smells like it could strip paint off a barn, and sets it down untouched. He's not here to get drunk, he's here to make a point. Drinking on the first day screams reckless, and he's aiming for reliable. "Appreciate the hospitality," he says, loud enough for the room to hear. "But I'm here to clean up Dry Gulch, not add to the mess. Anyone got a problem with that? We can talk now. Anyone got information on Silas Reed? I'm all ears." He leans against the bar, casual as you please, but his hands close to his holster, just in case someone decides talking means shooting. The room's quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet now, less mocking, more curious. The piano player starts up again, softer this time, like he's trying not to break the moment. A woman at the far end of the bar, dressed in a faded calico dress that's seen better days, speaks up. "You're either crazy or got a death wish, Sheriff. Silas don't take kindly to badges." Her voice is sharp, like a knife wrapped in velvet, and her eyes are sharper still. This is Miss Clara, the schoolteacher, who's seen enough of Dry Gulch's nonsense to write a book about it, if she could afford the paper. Jonathan meets her gaze, and for a moment, it's like they're the only two people in the room. "Maybe I'm a little of both, ma'am," he says, tipping his hat again. "But I'm here now, and I ain't leaving till the job's done." It's a bold statement, and he half expects the room to laugh again. Instead, there's a murmur, a shift in the air. Not trust, not yet, but something close to interest. A few heads nod, and even Zeke, the scarred cowboy, raises an eyebrow, like he's sizing Jonathan up for the first time. Let's take a step back, my friend, and soak in this moment. You're in the Rusty Spur, surrounded by the smell of cheap whiskey and cheaper cigars. The air's thick, the kind of thick that sticks to your throat like molasses. You can hear the faint buzz of a fly circling a spilled drink, the creak of a chair as someone shifts their weight, the soft clink of a spur as a cowboy crosses his legs. Jonathan's standing there, one hand on the bar, the other near his gun, trying to look like he's got everything under control while his heart's pounding like a war drum. What would you say to him right now? Good luck, pal. Or maybe, run while you still can? He's committed though, and there's no backing out now. Before he can press the crowd for more about Silas Reed, the saloon doors bang open with a force that rattles the glasses. A kid, no older than 16, stumbles in, panting like he's run from the next county. His face is red, his hat's half off, and his eyes are wide as saucers. "Sheriff!" he gasps, clutching the doorframe. "They're comin'. Silas's men. Spotted 'em ridin' in from the canyon." The room erupts into chaos, chairs scraping, glasses clinking, voices shouting over each other like a flock of spooked chickens. A prospector spills his drink, cursing loud enough to wake a coma patient. Zeke stands, his hand dropping to his own gun, and even Miss Clara's sharp eyes narrow, like she's calculating how fast she can get to the schoolhouse. The piano player stops mid-note, and for a moment, the only sound is the kid's ragged breathing. Jonathan's heart kicks like a mule, but he keeps his face calm, like he's been expecting this all along. "All right, folks," he says, raising a hand to quiet the din. "Let's see what kind of welcome Dry Gulch throws for trouble." His voice is steady, but inside, he's thinking, well, Jonathan, you wanted adventure. Here it is, galloping straight at you. Now, let's flesh out the scene a bit more, because a sheriff's first day isn't just about swagger and saloons. Jonathan steps outside, the kid, Tommy, as he'll later learn, trailing behind him like a nervous puppy. The street's still quiet, but there's a tension in the air now, like the moment before a storm breaks. The sun's dipping lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, and the dust seems to glow, like the whole town's holding its breath. Jonathan squints toward the canyon, a jagged scar in the distance where the prairie meets the sky. No sign of riders yet, but Tommy's shaking like a leaf, and that's enough to tell him trouble's coming. He heads for the jail, figuring it's time to see what he's working with. The building's even sadder up close, a squat, one-room shack with a single cell, a desk that's seen better days, and a roof that looks like it's auditioning for a sieve. The bars on the cell are rusted, and the lock's so flimsy a good kick could open it. "Home sweet home," Jonathan mutters, kicking at a loose floorboard. There's a cot in the corner, a lantern that's more soot than glass, and a stack of wanted posters curling at the edges. Silas Reed's face stares up from the top one, his smirk practically daring Jonathan to try his luck. Tommy's still hovering, wiping sweat from his brow. "They say Silas's got 10 men, he blurts out. "Maybe more. They hit the bank in Redstone last month, cleaned it out before anyone could blink." The kid's voice cracks, and Jonathan can't tell if it's fear or excitement. "Probably both. 10 men, huh?" Jonathan says, keeping his tone light. "Well, I've got Mabel, and she's worth at least 3. We'll manage." Tommy blinks, not sure if he's joking, and Jonathan claps him on the shoulder. "Go find Miss Clara. Tell her to keep the kids inside. And don't run off, you're my deputy for now." Tommy's eyes widen, but he nods and scampers off, leaving Jonathan alone with his thoughts and a jail that's about as defensible as a paper bag. He checks his peacemaker, spinning the cylinder to make sure it's loaded. The gun's new, barely fired, and he's hoping he won't have to test it today. But hope's a flimsy thing in Dry Gulch, and he knows it. Back at the saloon, the crowd's thinned out. Some folks have slipped out the back, probably to hide under their beds, while others are whispering in corners, casting glances his way. Gus is still behind the bar, polishing that same glass, but his eyes are on Jonathan now, weighing him like a butcher sizing up a side of beef. Miss Clara's still there too, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. "You really think you can take on Silas?" she asks, her voice low enough that only he hears. "Don't have much choice, do I?" Jonathan replies, matching her tone. "Unless you've got a better idea, ma'am." She snorts, a sound that's half amusement, half pity. "Don't call me ma'am. Makes me feel like my grandmother. And yeah, I've got an idea. Don't die on your first day. Town's short on sheriffs." There's a spark in her eyes, and Jonathan can't help but grin. She's tough, this one, and he's starting to think she might be an ally, if he can earn her trust. Before he can respond, Zeke saunters over, his spurs jangling like loose change. "Heard the kid," he says, his scarred cheek twitching. "You plannin' to face Silas's boys with that shiny new gun and a prayer?" Jonathan shrugs, leaning against the bar. "Got a horse, a badge, and a decent aim. Figure that's a start. You offering to help, or just here to watch the show?" Zeke laughs, a dry, rasping sound. "Ain't decided yet, Sheriff. But I'll tell you this, Silas don't play fair. Last sheriff tried talkin' him down. They're still pickin' his teeth outta the street." "Appreciated," Jonathan says, his stomach twisting. "Any chance you know where he's holed up?" Zeke's grin fades, and for a moment, he looks almost serious. "Canyon's their usual spot. Gotta camp out there, maybe a mile past the old mine. But you go ridin' in, you won't come out." Jonathan nods, filing that away. He's not planning a suicide mission, not yet, anyway. He needs allies, a plan, and maybe a miracle. But first, he needs to survive the next hour. The saloon doors swing open again, and this time it's Old Man Jenkins, the town's unofficial historian, who's so old he probably remembers when the prairie was just a twinkle in God's eye. His face is leathery, his eyes sharp despite the whiskey he's been nursing since breakfast. "Sheriff," he croaks, "you'd best get to the jail. Folks are gatherin', and they ain't happy." Jonathan sighs, rubbing the back of his neck. "Already? I haven't even unpacked." He glances at Clara, who raises an eyebrow, and Zeke, who's back to grinning like he's enjoying this far too much. "All right," Jonathan says, straightening up. "Let's go see what Dry Gulch has to say." Outside, a small crowd's forming. Maybe a dozen people, a mix of farmers, shopkeepers, and a couple of cowboys who look like they'd rather be anywhere else. The mayor, a portly man named Hiram Booth, is at the front, his mustache quivering like it's got a life of its own. "Sheriff Kell," he calls, his voice high and nervous. "We need to talk about this situation." Jonathan steps onto the street, the dust crunching under his boots. The crowd's muttering, and he catches words like Silas, trouble, and fool. Not exactly a warm welcome, but he's not surprised. "All right, folks," he says, raising his hands. "I know you're scared. I know Silas Reed's been running roughshod over this town. But I'm here to change that. I need your help, though. Can't do it alone." The crowd's quiet for a moment, then Hiram steps forward, wiping sweat from his brow. "No offense, Sheriff, but we've heard that before. Last fella said the same thing, and he's pushin' up daisies now." Jonathan nods, keeping his expression calm. "Fair point. But I'm not him. And I'm not planning to end up in a box just yet. Silas's men are coming, and we've got two choices. Hide and hope they don't burn the town down, or stand together and show 'em Dry Gulch ain't theirs for the taking." The crowd murmurs again, and Jonathan can see the doubt in their eyes. These are folks who've been beaten down by fear, who've watched their neighbors get robbed or worse. But he also sees a flicker of something else. Hope, maybe, or just plain desperation. He's about to say more when Tommy comes running back, his face even paler than before. "Sheriff!" he yells, skidding to a stop. "They're closer now, maybe 10 minutes out. I saw him from the hill." The crowd gasps, and Hiram's mustache practically jumps off his face. Jonathan's heart kicks up again, but he forces a grin. "Well, folks, looks like we're skipping the pleasantries. Who's with me?" The silence is deafening, but Miss Clara steps forward, her chin high. "I'm not letting those bastards scare my kids again," she says. "Count me in." Zeke snorts, but there's a glint in his eye. "What the hell? Ain't got nothin' better to do." One by one, a few others nod. Old Man Jenkins, a farmer named Amos, even Gus, who's lugging a shotgun from behind the bar. It's not an army, but it's a start. Jonathan looks at them, his chest tight with something that might be pride or might just be terror. "All right," he says. "Let's get to the jail and figure out how to keep this town standing." And so, my friend, Jonathan Kell's first day in Dry Gulch takes a sharp turn from dusty dreams to a dusty showdown. The sun's sinking, the air's thick with tension, and somewhere out there, Silas Reed's men are riding closer, their spurs jingling like a death knell. Stick around, this is just the beginning. Jonathan's standing outside the jail, his boots planted in the dirt of Main Street, squinting toward the canyon where a faint cloud of dust is rising like a storm brewing on the horizon. The crowd from earlier, Miss Clara, Zeke, Old Man Jenkins, Gus the bartender, and a handful of reluctant townsfolk, are huddled nearby, their whispers mixing with the creak of the general store's sign and the distant whinny of a horse. Tommy's still panting from his sprint, his eyes wide as dinner plates, and Jonathan can feel the kid's fear like it's a living thing. "How many did you see, Tommy?" he asks, keeping his voice steady, like he's asking about the weather and not a pack of outlaws who'd sooner shoot him than shake his hand. "6, maybe 7, Tommy stammers, wiping sweat from his brow. "They're ridin' fast, Sheriff. Got rifles, too." The kid's voice cracks, and Jonathan can't tell if he's about to bolt or burst into tears. Either way, he's not exactly inspiring confidence. 6 or 7, Jonathan repeats, nodding like it's no big deal, though his stomach's doing flips like a saloon dancer on a Saturday night. He glances at the crowd, who are looking at him like he's supposed to pull a miracle out of his hat. Miss Clara's got her arms crossed, her sharp eyes daring him to prove he's more than talk. Zeke's leaning against a post, his scarred cheek twitching with that half-grin that says he's enjoying this a bit too much. Gus is cradling his shotgun like it's a newborn, and Old Man Jenkins is muttering something about the good old days when outlaws had the decency to rob you at a reasonable hour. "All right, folks," Jonathan says, raising his voice to cut through the murmurs. "We've got company coming, and they ain't here for tea. I need everyone who can't or won't fight to get inside. Schoolhouse, saloon, wherever safe. The rest of you, stick with me. We're gonna show these boys Dry Gulch isn't their playground." The crowd hesitates, and for a moment, Jonathan thinks they're all gonna scatter like roaches when the lantern's lit. Then Miss Clara steps forward, her jaw set. "I'll get the kids to the schoolhouse," she says. "But you'd better not let those bastards near my classroom, Sheriff." There's a fire in her voice that makes Jonathan wonder if she's more dangerous than half of Silas's gang. Zeke chuckles, pushing off the post. "Well, ain't this a party? I'm in, Sheriff, but don't expect me to die for ya." He pulls a battered Winchester from his saddlebag, checking the chamber with a practiced flick. Gus grunts, hefting his shotgun. "I ain't lettin' no outlaws smash up my bar again. Count me in." Old Man Jenkins just nods, pulling a rusty pistol from his belt that looks like it might blow his hand off before it hits a target. A few others, Amos the farmer, a wiry shopkeeper named Eliza, and a cowboy who introduces himself as Red, step up, their faces a mix of fear and defiance. It's not exactly the cavalry, but it's what Jonathan's got. "Tommy," Jonathan says, turning to the kid, "you're with Miss Clara. Keep those kids calm, all right? You're braver than you look." Tommy blinks, then nods, scampering off after Clara like a puppy chasing a bone. Jonathan watches them go, then turns to his ragtag posse. Let's get to the jail. It's not much, but it's got walls and a roof, mostly. The jail's as pathetic as it was an hour ago, but it's the best defensible spot in town. The group piles inside, and Jonathan starts barking orders, trying to sound like he's done this before. Gus, you and Red take the front window. Zeke, you're with me at the door. Amos, Eliza, keep an eye on the back. Jenkins, you. Just don't shoot unless you're sure it's not one of us. The old man grumbles but takes a spot by the cell, his pistol wobbling in his hands. Jonathan checks his peacemaker again, the weight of it grounding him. The gun's new, its blued steel gleaming in the dim light, but he's only fired it at targets back in St. Louis. Now, with real trouble coming, he's wondering if those dime novels left out the part where your hands shake and your mouth tastes like dust. He pushes the thought aside, focusing on the task. The jail's door is half-rotted, but it'll hold for now. The windows are small, giving them cover, but also limiting their view. Outside, the dust clouds getting closer, and he can hear the faint thud of hooves, like a heartbeat pulsing through the prairie. Hey, Sheriff, Zeke says, his voice low. You ever faced a gang before? Or is this your first dance? Jonathan snorts, keeping his eyes on the street. First dance, Zeke. But I'm a quick learner. You. Zeke's grin widens. Been in a few scraps. Lost a tooth or two, kept the scars. You'll do fine if you don't try to talk him to death. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Jonathan mutters, but there's a spark of camaraderie there, fragile as a dry twig. He's starting to like Zeke, even if the man's about as trustworthy as a rattlesnake in a henhouse. The hooves are louder now, close enough to make the floorboards hum. Jonathan peeks through a crack in the door, his heart pounding like a blacksmith's hammer. 6 riders come into view, their silhouettes dark against the fiery sunset. They're rough-looking men, their hats pulled low, bandanas tied loose around their necks. Rifles glint in their hands, and one of them, a big fella with a beard like a briar patch, has a pair of pistols strapped to his chest. They pull up in the middle of the street, their horses snorting and pawing the dirt, and the town goes deathly quiet, like it's holding its breath. The big man, clearly the leader of this bunch, swings down from his horse, his boots kicking up puffs of dust. Well, well, he calls, his voice booming like a preacher on Sunday. Heard we got a new sheriff in Dry Gulch. Come on out, lawman. Let's have a look at ya. Jonathan's gut twists, but he knows hiding's not an option. He glances at his crew, Gus gripping his shotgun, Zeke looking like he's itching for a fight, Eliza and Amos pale but determined. Stay sharp, he whispers. Don't shoot unless I say. Then he takes a deep breath, pushes the door open, and steps onto the street. The heat hits him like a wall, the air thick with the smell of horse sweat and gun oil. The big man's staring at him, his grin wide and mean, like a wolf sizing up a lamb. The other riders stay mounted, their eyes hard under their hats. Jonathan keeps his hand near his peacemaker, but he doesn't draw, not yet. Afternoon, he says, his voice carrying across the street. I'm Sheriff Jonathan Kell. You must be Silas Reed's boys. Come to pay your respects, or just passing through. The big man laughs, a deep, guttural sound that makes Jonathan's skin crawl. Name's Caleb, he says. Silas sent us to welcome you proper. He don't like badges, see? Tends to make him itchy. The riders chuckle, and one of them spits into the dust, his rifle resting easy across his saddle. Jonathan forces a smile, though it feels like it's carved from wood. Well, Caleb, you tell Silas I'm here to stay. Dry Gulch is under my protection now. You boys can ride out peaceful, or we can make this interesting. Caleb's grin fades, and for a moment, Jonathan thinks he's pushed too far. Then the outlaw steps closer, his boots crunching in the dirt. Big talk for a man with a shiny new star, he says. Last sheriff talked big too. Didn't help him much. Jonathan's heart's pounding, but he keeps his eyes locked on Caleb's. He's read about moments like this, standoffs where one wrong move means a bullet. He's not sure if he's supposed to draw, talk, or pray, but he knows he can't back down. "I'm not him," he says, his voice steady despite the sweat trickling down his spine. "And I'm betting you don't want to find out how different I am." The street's silent, save for the creak of a saddle and the faint buzz of a fly. The riders are watching, their hands twitching near their guns. Caleb's eyes narrow, and Jonathan can almost see the gears turning. Does he push, or does he fold? Before anyone can decide, a shot rings out from behind Jonathan, sharp and loud, kicking up dust a few feet from Caleb's boots. Jonathan spins, his heart leaping into his throat. It's Zeke, leaning out the jail door, his Winchester smoking. "Just help in with the conversation," Zeke calls, his grin wider than ever. The crowd inside the jail gasps, and Jonathan curses under his breath. So much for diplomacy. Caleb's face darkens, and his hand drops to his pistol. "Big mistake, Sheriff," he growls. "You just bought yourself a heap of trouble." Jonathan's mind races. He's got seconds to turn this around before the street turns into a shooting gallery. "Hold up, Caleb," he says, raising a hand. "Nobody's dying today. You want a message for Silas? Here it is. Dry Gulch ain't his. He wants it, he'll have to come through me." Caleb hesitates, his fingers still on his gun. The riders shift in their saddles, waiting for a signal. Jonathan's hand hovers over his peacemaker, his pulse hammering in his ears. Then, slowly, Caleb's grin returns, cold as a winter wind. "All right, Sheriff," he says. "We'll pass it along. But Silas don't like being told no. You'll see us again, real soon." He swings back onto his horse, and with a sharp whistle, the riders wheel around and gallop out of town, their dust trail blending into the sunset. Jonathan lets out a breath he didn't know he was holding, his knees feeling like jelly. The crowd spills out of the jail, their voices a mix of relief and disbelief. Zeke slaps him on the back, laughing like he didn't just nearly start a war. "Not bad, Sheriff," he says. "You didn't wet yourself, so that's something." Jonathan glares at him, but there's no heat in it. "Next time, warn me before you shoot, all right?" Zeke shrugs. "Where's the fun in that?" Miss Clara's back now, her face a mix of approval and exasperation. "You got lucky," she says. "But Silas won't send Caleb next time. He'll come himself." Jonathan nods, his mind already racing. He's bought some time, but not much. Silas Reed's out there, and this was just a taste of what's coming. He looks at his little posse, Zeke, Gus, Jenkins, and the others, and feels a spark of something like hope. "All right," he says. "Let's get to work. We've got a town to protect." Jonathan Kell's first challenge in Dry Gulch ends with no blood spilled, but the day's far from over. The dust is settling, but the storm's just beginning. Stick around, because Silas Reed doesn't take kindly to defiance, and Jonathan's about to learn what it really means to wear the badge. Sheriff Jonathan Kells just faced down Caleb and his pack of outlaws, and while he didn't end up with any extra holes in his hide, he knows that was just the appetizer. Silas, Coyote, Reed's out there, licking his chops, and Jonathan's got about as much time as a jackrabbit in a coyote's sights to get this town ready for the main course. The dust from the outlaws' retreat is still settling, and the folks of Dry Gulch are looking at Jonathan like he's either their savior or their undertaker. No pressure, right? Let's see how our greenhorn sheriff turns a ragtag bunch of skeptics into something resembling a fighting force. The street's quiet now, save for the soft creak of the general store sign swinging in the evening breeze. The sky's a deep purple, streaked with the last gasps of sunset, and the air's cooling just enough to make the sweat on Jonathan's neck feel like a cold kiss. He's standing outside the jail, his Colt Peacemaker still heavy on his hip, his badge catching the fading light like it's trying to remind him who he's supposed to be. The crowd from the standoff, Miss Clara, Zeke, Gus, Old Man Jenkins, Amos the farmer, Eliza the shopkeeper, and Red the cowboy, are still nearby, their faces a mix of relief and worry. They're not exactly singing his praises, but they haven't run for the hills either, which Jonathan's taking as a win. "All right, folks," he says, wiping dust from his hat and trying to sound like he's got a plan. "We sent Caleb and his boys packing, but they'll be back, and I'm guessing Silas won't be in a chatting mood next time. We need to get this town ready, jail, defenses, whatever we've got. Who's with me?" There's a pause, long enough to make Jonathan's stomach twist. Then Miss Clara steps forward, her calico dress catching the breeze. "You're still alive, Sheriff, so I'll give you that much," she says, her sharp eyes glinting. "But this town's been burned before, literally and figuratively. You want our help, you'd better prove you're worth it." Jonathan nods, meeting her gaze. "Fair enough, Clara. Let's start by making sure this jail doesn't fall apart if someone sneezes." That gets a chuckle from Red, who's leaning against a hitching post, his spurs jingling like loose change. Zeke, ever the skeptic, smirks. "You plannin' to build a fortress out of splinters and spit, Sheriff? 'Cause that's about all this place has got." Jonathan grins, though it's more bravado than confidence. "I've seen worse. Come on, let's see what we're working with." The group trudges back into the jail, which looks even sorrier in the dim light of a single lantern. The walls are weathered planks, the roof leaks like a sieve, and the cell's bars are so rusty they might crumble under a stern look. Jonathan kicks at a loose floorboard, which groans like it's begging for mercy. "Well," he says, "it's not the Alamo, but it'll do for now. Gus, Red, you know carpentry." Gus grunts, setting his shotgun against the wall. "Built my bar, didn't I? I can hammer a nail straight." Red nods, though he looks like he'd rather be wrangling cattle than playing handyman. "Good," Jonathan says. "Start reinforcing the door and windows. Use whatever you can find, boards, crates, anything that'll hold. Amos, Eliza, check the town for supplies, nails, hammers, maybe some old barrels we can use for cover." Amos, a wiry farmer with hands like leather, scratches his head. "Ain't much in the way of supplies, Sheriff. Silas's boys cleaned out the general store last month." Eliza, the shopkeeper, pipes up, her voice sharp but steady. "I've got some lumber out back, and a crate of nails I hid from those bastards. It's not much, but it's a start." Jonathan claps his hands together, the sound sharp in the cramped jail. "That's the spirit. Jenkins, you're on lookout. Yell if you see anything moving that's not a tumbleweed." Old Man Jenkins mutters something about young whippersnappers, but shuffles to the window, his rusty pistol clutched like a holy relic. As the group scatters to their tasks, Jonathan feels a flicker of hope, fragile as a candle in a windstorm. He's got a crew, small, skeptical, and armed with more grit than gear, but it's something. He turns to Zeke, who's lounging against the cell bars like he's waiting for a stage show. "You got any bright ideas, Zeke? Or you just here for the entertainment?" Zeke's scarred cheek twitches. "Reckon I could scout the canyon. Silas's camp ain't far, mile or so past the old mine. Might figure out what they're plannin'." Jonathan hesitates. Zeke's slippery as a greased pig, and trusting him feels like betting on a three-legged horse. But he needs information, and Zeke's the only one who seems to know the lay of the land. "All right," he says. "But you come back, you hear? I'm not fishing you out of a ditch." Zeke tips his hat, his grin sharp as a razor. "Wouldn't dream of making you work that hard, Sheriff." He slips out the back, his boots barely making a sound, and Jonathan's left wondering if he's just made a deal with the devil. "Let's pause here, my friend, and take a moment to soak in the scene. You're in Dry Gulch, standing in this rickety jail, the air thick with the smell of dust and old wood. the lanterns flickering, casting shadows that dance like ghosts on the walls. Outside, you can hear the faint clatter of hammers as Gus and Red start patching up the door. The murmur of Amos and Eliza arguing over where to find more nails. The creak of Jenkins's chair as he squints into the dusk. Jonathan's pacing, his boots scuffing the floor, his mind racing faster than a stagecoach. What would you do in his shoes? Start nailing boards or start praying? He's choosing action, but you can bet he's whispering a prayer or two under his breath. The next hour is a blur of activity. Gus and Red drag in planks from a busted wagon behind the saloon, their hammers ringing out like a blacksmith symphony. Eliza and Amos return with a crate of rusty nails and a couple of barrels that smell like they once held whiskey, or worse. Jonathan helps haul the barrels, stacking them near the windows to create makeshift cover. The work's hard, the air heavy with dust and sweat, but there's a rhythm to it, a sense of purpose that's starting to bind this motley crew together. Miss Clara shows up, her arms full of blankets from the schoolhouse. "Figured you might need these," she says, tossing them onto the cot. "Kids are safe, but they're scared. Told him you'd keep the bad men away, Sheriff. Don't make a liar out of me." Jonathan wipes his brow, managing a smile. "No pressure, then. Thanks, Clara. You sticking around?" She snorts, rolling up her sleeves. "Somebody's gotta keep you fools from shooting each other. Besides, I can swing a hammer as good as any man here." She grabs a plank and starts helping Gus, her movements quick and sure, and Jonathan starting to think she's the real backbone of this town. As the group works, the mayor, Hiram Booth, waddles in, his mustache quivering like it's got a mind of its own. "Sheriff Kell," he says, his voice high and nervous, "I hope you know what you're doing. The town council's not thrilled about this standoff business. We've kept the peace by staying out of Silas's way." Jonathan pauses, a nail halfway into a board. "Peace, Hiram? You call getting robbed and terrorized peace? I'm here to change that, but I need the town behind me. You in or out?" Hiram's face reddens, and he sputters like a kettle on the boil. "Now see here, young man, I've got a responsibility to keep this town standing. Antagonizing Silas Reed isn't antagonizing." Jonathan cuts in, his voice sharp. "He sent 6 armed men to my doorstep, Hiram. I didn't start this fight, but I'm damn well gonna finish it. You want to help? Grab a hammer. You want to hide? Go join the kids in the schoolhouse." The room goes quiet, the hammering stopping as everyone turns to watch. Hiram's mustache twitches, and for a moment, Jonathan thinks he's gonna storm out. Then the mayor sighs, his shoulders slumping. "Fine," he mutters. "But if this goes south, it's on your head." He grabs a hammer, his movements clumsy but determined, and starts pounding a nail with more enthusiasm than skill. Jonathan exchanges a look with Clara, who raises an eyebrow like she's impressed despite herself. "Didn't think you had that in you, Sheriff," she says quietly. "Me neither," Jonathan admits, and they share a quick grin before diving back into the work. The jail's starting to look less like a shack and more like a fortress. Well, a fortress held together with hope and rusty nails. The doors reinforced with extra planks, the windows are half covered with boards, and the barrels are stacked high enough to give decent cover. It's not much, but it's a start. Jonathan's just starting to feel like they might pull this off when Zeke slips back in, his face grim and his hat dusted with fresh dirt. "Got news, Sheriff," he says, keeping his voice low. "Silas's camp's bigger than I thought. At least a dozen men, maybe more. They're holed up in a gulch past the mine, got a fire going and enough guns to start a war. Heard him talkin' about hittin' the bank tomorrow night." Jonathan's heart sinks, but he keeps his face neutral. "Tomorrow night, huh? That gives us a day to get ready. Anything else?" Zeke hesitates, his eyes flicking to the others. "Yeah. One of 'em mentioned the mayor. Said Hiram's been cooperative." Might wanna keep an eye on him. Jonathan glances at Hiram, who's still hammering away, oblivious to the conversation. His stomach twists again, but he nods. Thanks, Zeke. Keep that between us for now. Zeke tips his hat and slips back into the shadows, leaving Jonathan with a new problem. A traitor in the town, or at least someone playing both sides, could ruin everything. He's about to call Hiram over when Tommy bursts through the door, his face pale as a ghost. "Sheriff!" he gasps, clutching his hat. "Riders. More of 'em. Comin' from the east this time. And they ain't slowin' down." The room freezes, hammers dropping as everyone turns to Jonathan. His heart's pounding again, but he forces a grin, like this is just another Tuesday. "All right, folks," he says, grabbing his peacemaker. "Looks like Silas is sending dessert early. Let's give them a dry gulch welcome." The jail's a hive of tension, the air thick with the smell of sweat, gun oil, and the faint tang of fear. The lanterns flickering, casting jittery shadows on the newly boarded walls, and every creak of the floorboards sounds like a warning. Jonathan's at the door, his Colt peacemaker heavy in his hand, his heart thumping like a war drum. Outside, the hoofbeats are louder now, a steady rumble that shakes the dust from the rafters. Gus is at the window, his shotgun ready, his beard bristling like a porcupine. Red's beside him, his rifle steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. Miss Clara's stacking the last of the barrels, her movements quick and precise, while Amos and Eliza are at the back, clutching a mismatched pair of pistols. Old Man Jenkins is still at his post, muttering about "damn outlaws," and waving his rusty revolver like it's a magic wand. And Hiram, the mayor? He's hammering a nail into a board with the enthusiasm of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Jonathan peeks through a crack in the door, his breath catching as he counts the riders. 8 this time, their silhouettes dark against the moonlit prairie. They're moving slower than Caleb's crew, deliberate, like wolves circling a wounded deer. The lead rider's a lean figure, his hat tilted low, a long duster coat flapping in the breeze. Even from here, Jonathan knows it's not Caleb. There's a weight to this man's presence, a quiet menace that makes the hairs on his neck stand up. "That's gotta be Silas," he mutters, his voice barely a whisper. Zeke, back from his scouting, sidles up beside him, his Winchester slung across his shoulder. "Yup," he says, his scarred cheek twitching. "That's the coyote himself. Meaner than a rattlesnake and twice as slippery. You sure you wanna dance with him, Sheriff?" Jonathan forces a grin, though his mouth's dry as the desert. "Didn't come to Dry Gulch to sit out the party, Zeke. You got my back." Zeke's grin is sharp as a knife. "Long as there's fun to be had, I'm here. Just don't expect me to sing you a lullaby after." Before Jonathan can respond, the riders pull up in the street, their horses snorting and pawing the dirt. Silas dismounts, his movements slow and deliberate, like a man who knows every eye's on him. He's lean, almost wiry, with a face carved from hard lines and a mustache that curls like it's got secrets of its own. His eyes glint in the moonlight, cold and calculating, and when he speaks, his voice is low, almost silky, but it carries like a gunshot. "Sheriff Kell," he calls. "I hear you've been making noise about protectin' this town. Step on out. Let's talk about how that's gonna go." Jonathan's stomach twists, but he knows there's no hiding. He glances at his crew, their faces pale but resolute. "Stay ready," he whispers. "If this goes south, aim low and don't hesitate." He takes a deep breath, pushes the door open, and steps into the street. The night air's cool now, a sharp contrast to the day's heat, but it does nothing to ease the sweat trickling down Jonathan's spine. The streets bathed in moonlight, the dust glowing like silver, and the town so quiet he can hear his own heartbeat. Silas stands maybe 20 paces away, his hands loose at his sides, a pair of revolvers gleaming at his hips. The other riders stay mounted, their rifles ready, their faces half hidden by bandanas. Jonathan keeps his hand near his peacemaker, but he doesn't draw, not yet. He's read enough dime novels to know a showdown when he sees one, but he's hoping he can talk his way out of this. For now. Evenin', Silas, Jonathan says, his voice steady despite the knot in his gut. Heard you've been runnin' things around here. I'm here to change that. How about you and your boys ride out, and we call it a night? Silas laughs, a low, rumbling sound that's more threat than amusement. You got guts, Sheriff, I'll give you that. But guts don't stop bullets. This town's mine, bank, saloon, all of it. You're just a fly buzzin' around my supper. Jonathan's eyes narrow, but he keeps his tone light. Funny thing about flies, they're hard to swat. And this town's under my protection now. You want it, you'll have to go through me. The riders shift in their saddles, their hands tightening on their rifles. Silas's smile doesn't waver, but there's a glint in his eyes that says he's weighing his options. Big talk for a man who's been here 5 minutes, he says. Tell you what, Sheriff. Hand over the bank's keys, and maybe we won't burn this place to the ground. Jonathan's mind races. The bank's keys are with Hiram, who's still in the jail, probably sweating through his fancy vest. Giving them up would save a fight tonight, but it'd hand Silas the town on a platter. He's about to reply when a scream cuts through the night, sharp and terrified, coming from the direction of the schoolhouse. Jonathan's heart stops. Clara. The kids. He glances at Silas, who's still smiling, like he planned this. Sounds like trouble, Silas says, his voice dripping with mock concern. Better go check on your flock, Sheriff. We'll be waitin'. Jonathan's torn, his instincts screaming to run to the schoolhouse, but he knows leaving now could mean losing the street. He's about to call Silas's bluff when Clara bursts out of the jail, her face pale, her eyes blazing. They've got Tommy, she shouts. One of your men grabbed him from the schoolhouse. The crowd gasps, and Jonathan's blood runs cold. Tommy, the kid who's been running messages all day, who looked at him like he was some kind of hero. Silas's grin widens, and he spreads his hands like he's innocent. Kids wander, Sheriff. Dangerous place, Dry Gulch. You want him back, maybe we can make a deal. Jonathan's hand twitches toward his gun, but he catches himself. A shootout now could get Tommy killed, and half the town with him. What do you want, Silas? He growls, his voice low and dangerous. The bank, Silas says simply. Keys, gold, all of it. Hand it over, and the kid walks. Play hero, and he don't. Jonathan's mind is a whirlwind. He's got no leverage, no numbers, and a hostage situation on his hands. He glances at Clara, whose fists are clenched, her eyes burning with a mix of fear and fury. Don't you dare give in, she hisses. We'll get Tommy back. Jonathan nods, his jaw tight. All right, Silas, he says, raising his voice. You want the bank. You'll have to take it. But if that kid gets hurt, I swear I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. Silas's smile falters, just for a second, and Jonathan seizes the moment. Zeke, Gus, cover me, he shouts, bolting toward the schoolhouse. The jail erupts behind him, shots ringing out as Gus and Zeke fire warning shots over the riders' heads. The outlaws duck, their horses rearing, and for a moment, chaos reigns. Jonathan sprints down the street, Clara right behind him, her dress hiked up as she matches his pace. The schoolhouse is a small, weathered building at the edge of town, its windows dark except for a faint flicker of light. As they approach, Jonathan spots a lone figure outside, a lanky outlaw holding Tommy by the collar, a pistol pressed to the kid's temple. Tommy's eyes are wide, but he's not crying, and Jonathan feels a surge of pride mixed with terror. Stop right there, Sheriff, the outlaw calls, his voice high and nervous. One move, and the kid's done. Jonathan skids to a halt, raising his hands. Easy now, he says, his voice calm despite the adrenaline pumping through him. Let the kid go, and we can talk. The outlaw laughs, but it's shaky, like he's not sure he's got the upper hand. Silas wants the bank, lawman. You gonna give it up, or do I paint the street with this kid's brains? Clara steps forward, her voice steady as steel. You touch him, and I'll make sure you don't live to spend a dime of that gold. Her hand's on a small derringer she's pulled from her sleeve, and Jonathan realizes she's not just a schoolteacher, she's a force of nature. The outlaw hesitates, his eyes flicking between Jonathan and Clara. That's all the opening Jonathan needs. He dives to the side, drawing his peacemaker in one fluid motion, and fires a single shot. The bullet grazes the outlaw's arm, making him yelp and drop his gun. Tommy wriggles free, sprinting toward Clara, who scoops him up like a mother hen. The outlaw scrambles for his weapon, but Jonathan's on him in a flash, tackling him to the ground. They wrestle in the dust, fists flying, until Jonathan lands a solid punch that sends the outlaw sprawling. He ties the man's hands with a rope from the schoolhouse porch, his breath coming in ragged gasps. You all right, Tommy? He calls. Tommy nods, clinging to Clara. Why yeah, Sheriff. Thanks. Clara's eyes meet Jonathan's, and for a moment, there's something like respect there. Not bad, Kel, she says. But we're not done yet. She's right. The sound of gunfire from the street hasn't stopped, and as Jonathan drags the outlaw back toward the jail, he sees flashes of muzzle fire in the dark. Silas's men are returning fire now, their bullets splintering the jail's new boards. Gus and Zeke are holding their own, but the riders are circling, looking for an opening. Hiram's nowhere to be seen, and Jonathan's gut tells him the mayor's either hiding, or worse. He shoves the outlaw into the jail cell, slamming the door shut. Gus, status, he shouts. Still breathin'. Gus yells back, ducking as a bullet shatters a window. But they're pushin' hard. Jonathan grabs a rifle from the wall, joining Zeke at the door. We need to drive him back, he says. Any ideas? Zeke grins, pulling a stick of dynamite from his coat. Found this in the saloon's cellar. Wanna light up the night. Jonathan's eyes widen. You're crazy, but I like it. Aim for the street, not the buildings. We don't need to burn the town down. Zeke lights the fuse, the spark hissing like a snake, and hurls it into the street. The explosion is deafening, a fireball lighting up the night as dirt and dust rain down. The riders scatter, their horses bolting, and for a moment, the gunfire stops. Jonathan seizes the chance, stepping onto the street, his rifle raised. Silas, he shouts. This is your last warning. Get out, or we'll bury you. There's a long silence, then Silas's voice cuts through the dark, cold and amused. You're a stubborn one, Sheriff. I like that. But this ain't over. Enjoy your little victory. We'll be back for the bank. The sound of hooves fades into the night, and Jonathan lets out a shaky breath. The jail's still standing, Tommy's safe, and they've got a prisoner, but Silas's words hang heavy in the air. He turns to his crew, who are bruised, dusty, but alive. Good work, folks, he says. But we've got a long night ahead. Inside the jail, the crew's catching their breath. Gus is nursing a bruised shoulder, muttering about how his saloon's never seen this much action. Red's cleaning his rifle, his spurs jingling softly as he shifts in his chair. Miss Clara's tending to Tommy, who's curled up on a cot with a blanket, his face pale but proud. Amos and Eliza are stacking what's left of their makeshift barricades, their voices low and weary. Old Man Jenkins is still at the window, his rusty pistol clutched like it's his lifeline, though he's nodding off every few seconds. Zeke's lounging by the cell, where the captured outlaw, a lanky fellow with a busted lip, is glaring at the floor. And Hiram? Still no sign of the mayor, which is gnawing at Jonathan like a bad tooth. Jonathan steps back inside, the floorboards creaking under his boots. Everybody all right? He asks, his voice rough from shouting and dust. Clara looks up, her eyes sharp but softer than before. We're alive, Sheriff. That's more than I expected when those riders showed up. Tommy's shaken, but he'll be fine. She brushes a strand of hair from her face, and Jonathan notices a smudge of dirt on her cheek, a reminder of how she ran into the fray without hesitation. Good, Jonathan says, nodding at Tommy. You did good, kid. Braver than half the men I knew. Tommy manages a small smile, his voice barely a whisper. Didn't feel brave, Sheriff. But you saved me. Jonathan ruffles the kid's cheek, but phrases he's got a new bruise forming there. He nods, but the praise sits heavy on him. Saved Tommy, sure, but at what cost? The town's still under threat, and he's got no idea what Silas is planning next. He turns to his group, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. We held him off tonight, folks, but Silas ain't done. We need to figure out what we do next, and where the hell Hiram's gone. Gus snorts, wiping sweat from his beard. That weasel probably hightailed it to his fancy house the second the shootin' started. Always been more talk than spine. Eliza frowns, her hands still gripping a pistol. Or he's up to something. Wouldn't be the first time Hiram's played both sides. My shop's been hit twice by Silas's boys, and the mayor never lifted a finger. Jonathan's gut twists, remembering Zeke's warning about Hiram's cooperation with the gang. He glances at Zeke, who gives a slight nod, his scarred cheek twitching. We'll deal with Hiram, Jonathan says. But first, we need rest, ammo, and a plan. Clara, can you and Eliza check on the kids at the schoolhouse? Make sure they're settled. Gus, Red, take stock of our weapons. Amos, see if you can find any more supplies. Food, water, anything. Jenkins, you. Keep doing what you're doing. Jenkins grumbles, but his eyes stay on the street. The others nod, scattering to their tasks with a quiet determination that wasn't there a few hours ago. Jonathan feels a flicker of pride. They're not an army, but they're his, and they're fighting. He turns to Zeke, his voice low. You think Hiram's really workin' with Silas? Zeke shrugs, his grin gone for once. Wouldn't bet against it. Hiram's got a nose for self-preservation. If he's in bed with the coyote, he'll sell us out faster than you can spit. Jonathan nods, his jaw tight. Keep an eye on him if he shows up. I'm gonna take a walk. Clear my head. Zeke raises an eyebrow. Walkin' alone with Silas out there? You're braver than you look, Sheriff. Or dumber, Jonathan mutters, but he grabs his hat and steps into the night. The street's quiet now, the moonlight painting the town in shades of silver fancy shadow. Jonathan walks slowly, his boots crunching in the dirt, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of bandits. The saloon's closed up tight, its sign creaking in the breeze. The general store's windows are shuttered, and the schoolhouse looms at the edge, a reminder of Tommy's close call. Jonathan's mind drifts, pulling him back to St. Louis, Missouri, to the cramped desk where he spent his days scratching numbers in a ledger, dreaming of something bigger. Those dime novels he read, tales of Wild Bill Hickok and Buffalo Bill, made the West sound like a place where a man could make a name, do some good, be a hero. Now, standing in the middle of Dry Gulch with bullet holes in his jail and a grin on his face, grinning he's not so sure. He stops by the hitching post outside the saloon, leaning against it as he pulls a small, worn book from his pocket, a dog-eared copy of The Adventures of Deadwood Dick. He flips it open, the pages soft from countless readings, and a wry smile tugs at his lips. You lied to me, Dick, he mutters. Didn't mention the part where you're scared out of your wits and half the town wants you gone. A soft laugh startles him, and he spins to see Clara standing a few paces away, laughing. Talkin' to yourself, Sheriff? That's a bad sign. Jonathan tucks the book away, his face warming. Just thinkin' out loud. Shouldn't you be with the kids? Eliza's got him, Clara says, stepping closer. Thought you might need a talkin' to. You look like you're carryin' the whole town on your shoulders. Jonathan snorts, but there's no humor in it. Feels like it. Back in St. Louis, I thought being a sheriff was about right and wrong, good guys and bad. But here, I'm one wrong move from getting Tommy killed, or Gus, or you. And Hiram. Hell, I don't even know if I can trust the mayor. Clara's eyes soften, but her voice stays firm. You saved Tommy tonight, Jonathan. You stood up to Silas when nobody else would. That's more than any sheriff's done for Dry Gulch in years. You're not perfect, but you're trying. That's what counts. He meets her eyes, and for a moment, the weight lifts, just a little moment. Thanks, Clara. Didn't expect a schoolteacher to be handier with a derringer than a chalkboard. She smirks, patting her sleeve where the tiny pistol's hidden. Grew up on a ranch, Sheriff. Learned to shoot before I learned to read. Stick around, I might surprise you again. Jonathan chuckles, the sound easing the knot on his chest. Deal. But if I'm sticking around, I need to know this town's with me. Folks like Gus and Red are stepping up, but the rest? They're still waitin' for me to fail. They're scared, Clara says simply. Silas has been bleedin' this town dry for years. But tonight, you showed 'em it's possible to fight back. Give them time, they'll come around. As if on cue, Gus stomps out of the jail, his shotgun slung over his shoulder. Sheriff, he calls, his voice rough but warmly gruff. Got a tally on the ammo. Ain't much, but we're not dry yet. And, folks in the saloon are talkin'. Sayin' you're either crazy or the real deal. I'm leanin' toward crazy, but I'm with ya. Jonathan grins, the first real smile he's felt all day. Appreciate it, Gus. Keep the saloon standin'. All right. Gus nods, then hesitates, his eyes flicking to Clara. And, sorry for callin' you a city boy earlier. You're all right, Cal. He smiles at Jonathan. As Jonathan smiles back, no hard feelings, Gus, he says warmly. As Gus heads back inside, Clara raises an eyebrow and says, See? Even Gus is warmin' up. You're winnin' 'em over, one stubborn fool at a time. Jonathan's about to reply when a shadow moves at the edge of the street, near the general store. He tenses, his hand dropping to his gun, but it's just Eliza, her face pale in the moonlight. Sheriff, she says, her voice tight. You'd better come quick. Found something in Hiram's office. Papers, letters, papers. Looks like he's been writin' to Silas. Jonathan's blood runs cold, Clara's words about trust echoing in his head. Show me, he says, his voice hard. He follows Eliza, Clara close behind him, his mind racing. He follows her to the mayor's office, where papers reveal Hiram's been corresponding with Silas. If Hiram's been selling them out, every move they've made tonight could be compromised. The jail, the defense, and Tommy's dynamite rescue. Silas might know all about it all. They reach the mayor's office, which is a small, dusty room behind the town hall, its desk littered with papers and a single lantern burning low. Eliza points to a stack of letters, their wax seals broken, scratched out, the handwriting sharp and precise. He's scanning them, Jonathan's jaw tightens with each word. They're from to Silas from Hiram, promising information about the bank's gold, the town's defenses, and even the new sheriff's arrival. The last one, dated yesterday, mentions a plan for tonight's attack. Son of a bitch, he mutters, slamming the letter on the table. He's been playin' us from the start. Clara's face is grim, her derringer back in her hand. We need to find out, Jonathan says, his voice like steel. If he's still in town, he's got a problem. Before anyone can respond, a low whistle cuts through the night, sharp and urgent. It's Zeke's signal, calling from the jail's direction, his silhouette tense at the gate. Jonathan sprints back, Clara, and Eliza trailing, follow him, his heart racing. They reach the cell, where the prisoner's talking. Silas left something behind, Zeke mutters, his voice low and grim. A little surprise for us tonight. Jonathan's eyes narrow. What kind of surprise? He asks, gripping his pistol. The prisoner's sneering. You'll see, he says, his eyes glinting with malice. Check the bank's vault. Jonathan's stomach sinks. A trap, a bomb waiting to blow. Whatever it is, it's trouble. He turns to his crew, their faces lit by the flickering lantern. We're checkin' the bank, he says, his voice steady despite the fear. Zeke, Clara, with me. Gus, stay put. Amos, Jenkins, get ready to move. All right, my friend, strap on your spurs and keep your eyes peeled, because the night in Dry Gulch is far from over, and the stakes are higher than a saloon bet on a rigged poker game. The moon's still glowing, casting long shadows over a town that's been shot up, shaken up, and stirred up like a hornet's nest. Sheriff Jonathan Kells standing on the edge of a razor, his Colt Peacemaker at his side, his badge a little battered but still shining. The jail's holding together, barely. Tommy's safe, and they've got one of Silas, Coyote Reed's men locked up, but the mayor's a traitor, and there's a surprise waiting in the bank that's got everyone's nerves tighter than a fiddle string. The folks of Dry Gulch are starting to believe in their new sheriff, but with Silas out there plotting his next move, Jonathan's got to turn this town into a fortress before dawn, or die trying. Let's ride into the final stretch of this wild day, shall we? The jail's a flickering beacon in the dark, its lantern light spilling out onto the bullet-scarred street. Inside, the air's thick with the smell of gunpowder, sweat, and the faint tang of fear that hasn't quite faded. Jonathan's pacing, his boots scuffing the creaky floorboards, his mind racing faster than a runaway stagecoach. The prisoner's words, check the bank's vault, are echoing in his head, each syllable a warning of something nasty waiting to bite. His crew's gathered, their faces lit by the dim glow. Miss Clara, her derringer tucked away but her eyes sharp as ever. Zeke, leaning against the cell with that half-grin that says he's ready for anything. Gus, cradling his shotgun like it's an old friend. Red, checking his rifle with steady hands. Amos and Eliza, weary but resolute. And Old Man Jenkins, still muttering about outlaws but awake enough to be useful. Tommy's asleep on a cot, his breathing soft, a reminder of what they're fighting for. Jonathan stops pacing, his jaw tight. All right, folks, he says, his voice cutting through the tense silence. We've got a problem. Silas left us a present in the bank, and I'm betting it ain't a fruit basket. We need to check it out, but we're not rushing in blind. Clara, Zeke, you're with me. Gus, Red, hold the jail. Keep an eye on our guest. He nods at the prisoner, who's slumped in the cell, smirking like he knows something they don't. Amos, Eliza, get to the saloon and round up anyone who's willing to help. Jenkins, you're on lookout. If you see Hiram, or any of Silas's boys, holler. Gus grunts, his beard twitching. You think it's a trap, Sheriff? Jonathan's grin is grim. With Silas? I'd bet my badge on it. But we're not lettin' him call the shots. Clara steps forward, her calico dress streaked with dust. What about Hiram? If he's workin' with Silas, he could be feedin' our every move. Jonathan's eyes harden, the memory of those letters in Hiram's office burning like a brand. If Hiram shows his face, we'll have a long talk. For now, we focus on the bank. Let's move. The group splits, their footsteps echoing in the quiet night. Jonathan, Clara, and Zeke head for the bank, a squat brick building at the end of Main Street, its windows dark and its heavy oak door locked tight. The moonlight bathes the street in silver, the dust glowing like a ghost, and every shadow feels like it's hiding one of Silas's men. Jonathan's Peacemaker is in his hand, its weight grounding him, but his heart's pounding like a blacksmith's hammer. He's faced down Caleb, rescued Tommy, and stared into Silas's cold eyes, but this feels different, like walking into a rattlesnake's den with no boots on. Zeke kneels by the bank's door, pulling a set of lockpicks from his coat. Never leave home without him, he says, winking at Clara, who rolls her eyes but keeps her derringer ready. Jonathan stands watch, his eyes scanning the street, the saloon, the alleyways. The town's too quiet, like it's holding its breath, and he can't shake the feeling they're being watched. Got it, Zeke whispers, the lock clicking open. The door creaks as they slip inside, the air cool and musty, smelling of old paper and metal. The bank's small, just a counter, a few chairs, and a heavy iron vault at the back, its door slightly ajar. Jonathan's stomach twists. That's not right. Banks don't leave vaults open, not even in a town as beat up as Dry Gulch. Careful, he says, raising his gun. Silas wouldn't leave a gift unwrapped. They approach the vault, their boots soft on the wooden floor. Clara lights a match, its flame casting flickering shadows on the walls. Inside the vault, there's no gold, no cash. Just a small wooden crate, its lid nailed shut, and a folded piece of paper tucked under a corner. Jonathan picks up the note, his eyes narrowing as he reads Silas's sharp handwriting. A little something to keep you busy, Sheriff. Open it, if you dare. Zeke whistles low. That's the Coyote's style, all right. Probably dynamite, or worse. Clara's voice is steady, but there's an edge to it. We can't leave it here. If it's a bomb, it could take out half the town. Jonathan nods, his mind racing. We move it, carefully. There's a dry creek bed outside town, half a mile north. If it blows, it won't hurt anyone. Zeke, you good with this? Zeke's grin is back, sharp as a razor. Ain't my first dance with dynamite, Sheriff. Let's do it. Jonathan grabs the crate, his hands steady despite the weight of what might be inside. It's light, too light for comfort, and he can hear something shifting, like sand or powder. They slip out of the bank, moving fast but careful, sticking to the shadows. The creek bed's not far, but every step feels like a mile, the crate a ticking clock in Jonathan's arms. Clara's at his side, her derringer scanning the dark, while Zeke covers their rear, his Winchester ready. They reach the creek bed, a shallow gully lined with rocks and scrub. Jonathan sets the crate down gently, his breath coming in short bursts. All right, he says. Zeke, any chance you can disarm it? Zeke kneels, pulling a knife from his boot. Maybe. If it's dynamite, I can cut the fuse. If it's something fancier, we're in trouble. He pries at the lid, his movements slow and precise, while Jonathan and Clara stand back, their eyes locked on the crate. The lid pops open, and Zeke curses under his breath. Inside, there's no dynamite, just a pile of black powder, a short fuse, and a small glass vial filled with a clear liquid, wired to the lid. Greek fire, Zeke says, his voice tight. Break that vial, and this whole thing goes up like a torch. Silas ain't playin'. Jonathan's heart sinks. Greek fire, incendiary liquid used by outlaws to burn towns to the ground. One spark, and Dry Gulch could be ashes. Can you cut the fuse? He asks. Zeke shakes his head. Too risky. One wrong move, and we're all crispy. Best bet is to bury it deep and hope it don't ignite. They work fast, digging a hole with their hands and a flat rock, the dry earth crumbling under their fingers. The vial glints in the moonlight, a tiny threat with the power to destroy everything Jonathan's fought for. They lower the crate into the hole, covering it with dirt and rocks, then back away, their breaths heavy in the cool night air. Think that'll hold? Clara asks, her voice low. Jonathan wipes sweat from his brow. Better hope so. Let's get back to town. They hurry back to Dry Gulch, the streets still quiet but heavy with tension. At the jail, Gus and Red are waiting, their faces grim. No sign of Hiram, Gus says. But we got company. Folks from the saloon, wantin' to help. Jonathan steps outside, surprised to see a small crowd gathered. 10, maybe 12 townsfolk, armed with everything from pitchforks to old muskets. There's a blacksmith named Caleb, his arms like tree trunks, a widow named Martha, clutching a hunting rifle, and a few cowboys who look like they've seen their share of fights. They're not an army, but they're here, and that's more than Jonathan expected. Sheriff, Caleb says, his voice deep and steady. Heard what you did for Tommy. Reckon we've been sittin' on our hands too long. What do you need? Jonathan's throat tightens, a mix of relief and responsibility washing over him. I need you to help me make this town a fortress, he says. Silas is comin' back, and we need to be ready. Barricades, lookouts, anything we can muster. You in. The crowd murmurs, then nods, their faces hardening with resolve. Martha steps forward, her rifle gleaming. Silas took my husband last year. I'm in. Jonathan nods, his voice firm. All right. Caleb, you and the cowboys start buildin' barricades, wagons, barrels, whatever you can find. Martha, take a few folks and set up lookouts on the rooftops. Gus, Red, help organize. Clara, check the schoolhouse again, make sure it's secure. Zeke, you and me are gonna have a talk with our prisoner. Let's find out what else Silas is plannin'. The group scatters, their footsteps echoing with purpose. Jonathan feels a spark of hope, fragile but real. Dry Gulch is waking up, and he's not fighting alone anymore. He heads back to the jail, Zeke at his side, and stands in front of the cell. The prisoner looks up, his smirk gone, replaced by a wary glint. Talk, Jonathan says, his voice cold. What's Silas's next move? The outlaw laughs, but it's weak, like he's running out of bravado. You think you've won, Sheriff? Silas don't lose. That crate was just a taste. He's got plans, big ones. And you ain't ready. Jonathan leans closer, his eyes narrowing. You're gonna tell me everything, or I'll let Zeke here get creative. He's got a knack for persuadin'. Zeke cracks his knuckles, his grin sharp as a blade. The prisoner's face pales, and he starts talking, fast. All right. Silas is plannin' a big hit. Bank, saloon, all of it. Got more men comin', maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. And Hiram's in on it. Been feedin' us info for months. Jonathan's jaw tightens, his suspicions confirmed. Where's Hiram now? The prisoner shrugs, his eyes darting away. Dunno. Probably ran when the shootin' started. But he's got a hideout, old cabin, mile west of the canyon. Jonathan exchanges a look with Zeke, who nods. We'll check it out, Zeke says. But not tonight. We're stretched thin as it is. Jonathan agrees, but the thought of Hiram out there, scheming with Silas, burns like a hot coal. He's about to press the prisoner for more when Eliza bursts in, her face pale. Sheriff, she gasps. Found a telegraph wire. Someone's been sendin' messages from the general store. Just got one back, addressed to Hiram. It's from Silas. Jonathan's blood runs cold. He follows Eliza to the store, where a telegraph machine sits hidden behind a stack of crates, its wires snaking out a back window. The message is short, written in Silas's sharp hand. Plan B, Dawn. Bring the gold, or burn. Jonathan curses under his breath, his mind racing. Dawn's only a few hours away, and Silas is moving faster than he expected. The surprise in the bank was a distraction. Silas wants the gold, and he's willing to torch Dry Gulch to get it. Hiram's either with him or running scared, but either way, he's a loose end that needs tying. Get everyone back to the jail, Jonathan tells Eliza. We're not sleepin' tonight. Back at the jail, the crew gathers, the new volunteers crowding in with the originals. Jonathan lays out the situation, the telegraph, Silas's threat, Hiram's betrayal. The room's quiet, the weight of it all pressing down, but there's a fire in their eyes that wasn't there before. Silas thinks he's got us beat, Jonathan says, his voice steady. But we're not giving up. We've got till dawn to fortify this town, set traps, and show him Dry Gulch ain't his. Who's with me? The response is a chorus of nods and murmurs, louder than he expected. Clara's at his side, her derringer gleaming. You're not half bad at this, Kel, she says, a hint of a smile on her lips. Zeke slaps him on the back, his grin wide. "Reckon I'll stick around, Sheriff. This is gettin' fun." Gus raises his shotgun, his voice booming. "Let's give that coyote a taste of his own medicine." The group sets to work, their energy fueled by defiance. Barricades go up, made of overturned wagons and stacked crates. Lookouts climb to the rooftops, their rifles glinting in the moonlight. Jonathan and Zeke rig tripwires along the main street, using old rope and bells from the schoolhouse. Clara organizes the kids' families, moving them to the saloon for safety. The town's coming alive, its pulse quickening, and Jonathan feels like he's finally earning that badge. As dawn approaches, the horizon glowing faint pink, Jonathan stands on the jail's porch, his peacemaker at his hip, his crew at his back. The telegraph's warning echoes in his mind, but he pushes it aside. Silas is coming, and Dry Gulch is ready, or as ready as it'll ever be. But just as he's about to give the order to take positions, a lone rider appears on the horizon, galloping fast, a white cloth tied to his rifle. "Hold your fire!" Jonathan shouts, his eyes narrowing. The rider slows, and as he gets closer, Jonathan's heart skips a beat. It's Hiram, his mustache drooping, his face pale and sweaty. "Sheriff!" Hiram calls, his voice trembling. "I need to talk now. Silas is comin', and he's got a deal you can't refuse." Jonathan's hand tightens on his gun, his crew murmuring behind him. Is Hiram here to betray them again, or is he running scared? Either way, the sun's rising, and Silas's shadow is growing longer. The final fight's coming, and Jonathan's about to find out what kind of sheriff he really is. And so, my friend, Jonathan Kell's first day in Dry Gulch ends with a town transformed, a traitor's return, and a battle looming at dawn. The dust is rising, the coyotes howling, and the story's far from over. Stick around. Things are about to get legendary.